Okay, so hello everyone, to all of you that are here in the room, to all of you that are watching this event at the Cañada Blanche Center at the LSE using our YouTube channel, and to all of those that will be seeing it not live, but later on, whenever you have time in the convenience of your homes or at the bar or wherever, the coffee shop where you want to watch and you want to take advantage of these opportunities. And we have always been told that Africa is the continent of the future. It's the fastest growing continent by far in terms of population. It's also becoming more and more dynamic and more relevant from an economic point of view. But achieving development in Africa is always difficult. And it has problems, and there have been a lot of formulas and a lot of measures that have been implemented that have been more or less, and I would emphasize the less, successful than expected. One of them is that of the development corridor. That is now quite fashionable. Those of you that were in the lecture with me yesterday, I told you that I was involved with the World Bank in setting up a development corridor, 2 development corridors, in the case of Uganda. But in comparison to the person I have to my left here, I am an amateur. The real expert on African development and development corridors is Professor Javier Revilla Díez, who is not just an expert on Africa, but has got a huge experience in the global South, having conducted massive amount of research in Southeast Asia, in the case of Vietnam fundamentally, but also in China, mostly around the Pearl River Delta, one of the most dynamic areas in the world, not just right now, but for quite a few decades. Let me just introduce him. Javier Revilla holds a chair in human geography at the Institute of Geography at the University of Cologne, and he was appointed within the framework of the key profile area, socioeconomic, cultural, and political transformations in the Global South for the Global South Studies Center at the University of Cologne, which is one of the best centers for the studying development in Europe. He's a member of the advisory board of the Lower Saxony Institute for Economic Research and taught for many years at the University of Hanover and also at the University of Kiel. He, on top of that, has got a rich experience because you can be a successful academic. He had a previous life as a very successful pop star. So actually singing in front of thousands of people. No, he's actually very talented in many ways. Yeah. You had a number 2 or number 1 in Spain?
It was number 2 only.
I'm so disappointed. But nonetheless, I'm sure that you're going to compensate by the presentation that you're going to do today. So thank you very much. Thank you very much to the Fundación Cañada Blanche for funding this event. Thank you very much to the LSE, and especially thank you very much to all of you for attending. Javier, the floor is yours.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much, Andres, for these very warm words, and I'm happy to be back here at the LSE. I see Simona here, so many thanks for joining this session. And yeah, today I would like to present some results from my ongoing research in Africa. Africa really draws my attention when I moved to Cologne. As Andres said, my academic life was really very much based on Southeast Asia. I was fascinated by the really fast and dynamic evolution of their economies. And at the same time, you were able to see how this change, the economic growth, turns into regional changes as well, right? So this was really very interesting and fascinating. And since my time in Cologne, I got very much interested in looking at Africa, and Cologne is a very nice environment, or is offering a nice environment, because you have a lot of researchers from different fields not so much in economics, but in ethnography, for example, in area studies, sociologists, and so on, which is really very helpful to understand why things are not happening, not developing as expected. And another, big infrastructure tool which is introduced and which is very popular at the moment is the growth corridor, right? So the linear structure, as you see here in this picture, this highway which tries to attract economic activities. And yes, just to show you the team, because what I'm presenting here is based on their work in the field. Today, I don't have that much time to really spend months and months in the field, but the PhD students or former PhD students, as you can see here, and this is just to show you that what I'm presenting here is based on their results. And this is Caroline, this is Jim, this is Fanny, Justina, Mfundo, and Linus. And yes, it's popular. Yeah, it's very popular to use now this growth corridor approach really to foster regional development in many, many places. And you see this map here of Africa, and you see more than 21 initiatives, right? So this is really in fashion, right? And of course, growth corridors are nothing new, right? So especially if you look back in time, especially in Africa, there is a kind of colonial period where these corridors were basically already installed to get hold of the resources, especially of the Congo, right, in the middle of Africa, right. So this is something which started already with the British. But after independence, many countries in Africa either follow the Soviet Union style of development or the Western style, and both were very fascinating by infrastructures. They thought infrastructures really will bring this big push, right? The big push to modernity and change things, right? Either being a socialist country or more market-oriented country, right? So and nowadays, it's a little bit different. Yes, corridor development is somehow linked also to value chains, right? Because the idea is not to think or to understand these infrastructures so as transport modes, and it's also a way to integrate these places into global value chains. And this is what is a little bit different, right? It's not just thinking about the infrastructure, it's also trying to combine, let's say, the infrastructure with the potential in the region, right? So the vision. And today, and you see the outline of my presentation here, I would like to start with a little bit more conceptual things about what is the vision of the future when you are talking about growth corridors, what are the rationales for growth corridors, then the methods we applied. And later on, of course, my main chapter here in the presentation is the corridor realities. It's a very long name, the Suarez Bay and Ndola Lubumbashi Development Corridor. Formerly, it was called Trans-Caprivi, but of course, Caprivi is the former, let's say, ruler in Namibia, the German ruler. So they changed the name for I think for the better, right? But and they were using then the names of the places where the corridor is going through. It's starting here in Walvis Bay, which is supposed to be the entry point to southern Africa, right? And I would like to concentrate today on tourism. Tourism is a very fascinating sector, which is not so fancy, I think, in our economic geography discourse, right? It's more in tourism and management whatsoever, but not so much in economic geography. But it's central in the plans of the government, of the Namibian government, and not only the Namibian government. And I would like to explain shortly how, let's say, the commodification of nature is done, right? How natural assets are mobilized. Then I would like to present you some impacts on the livelihoods, which were based on our results, on our research. And then I would like to discuss future prospects. And at the moment, Mfundo is trying to adopt or to use this Trinity of Change agency concept in order to understand, okay, what is bringing development, what is probably also missing for creating new regional development paths, right? So this is the outline for my talk, and I don't know, I still have half an hour, around 40 minutes or something like this, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right, what are the, let's say, the expectations which you can read often in textbooks, but also in documents from the World Bank. And we're talking about an instrument which worked out in certain places. I would say it worked out in Germany, it worked out in many places in Europe, it worked out in China. And the idea is more or less that the argumentation is like the following here, right? So the transport corridor enables integrating places and connect them to markets, right? And this should insensitize, let's say, businesses, farmers, businesses along the corridor to really think about specializing and realizing economies of scale. Why? Because they have easier access to markets, and this will then reduce transaction costs, basically transportation costs. And what they then expect is that when companies are starting to grow, that they will need additional services. So they think about additional businesses and related firms, which then also evolve. And then you are talking about these typical snowball effects or agglomeration effects. In the literature, you also see kind of evolution of these corridors. It starts just with a physical connection, right? This is called a transport corridor. Then in the next step, you have facilities for storage and then and logistics, for example. This is then called logistics corridor. Then the next step would be, as these corridors are often crossing borders, to reduce tariffs and non-tariff barriers, right? To develop this trade corridor. Then the next step would be really the situation which I'm describing here, that apart from, let's say, the farming, for example, you have the evolution of further economic activities. And then the last stage would be then if also additionally to the economic, let's say, effects, you also have improvements in health, education, and so on, right? So this is more or less the thinking of how these corridors could evolve, right? All right, so this is more or less the classical theory, the assumptions which they have, how this corridor might give, let's say, development impulses. Now, let us talk about a little bit more about the critical note on let's say the rationales of growth corridors. And you see that growth corridors can be also seen as spatial imaginaries. And this new generation of global growth corridors in Africa are, as I already mentioned, top down, and they imagine the future of investments, modernity, and economic growth. And this is fine, right? So this is, in principle, it sounds very good. Both the results, they are both tangible. So you see improvement of roads, railways, bridges, but they're also intangible effects. And they are also affecting everyday economic practices. But what you can see in many cases in Africa, that there is a big gap between the hopes, really the right visions and hopes of the corridor plans and the reality, which is more fragmented. It's not so, let's say, so clear. And this is something where I'm digging in, so to understand why this is happening. And I think it's important to ask these questions then here. So where do corridors actually unfold their potential? Because it's not everywhere. Yeah. Who benefits? Yeah. Which places and which actors benefit? Which places and people are neglected by growth corridor planning? Yeah. Because in Namibia, for example, I won't touch agriculture so much, but they also have a green scheme concept, a green scheme program where they want to, let's say, improve agricultural production. right? Similar to the Green Revolution, yeah, to modernize agriculture, but it's not working out. The farmers, which are basically subsistence farmers, are not getting into these businesses. They don't become commercial farmers, right? All right, so which places and people are neglected by growth corridor planning? What do they do about it? And who makes the corridors? What are the consequences for value chain development? This is also very, very important, also in the case of tourism. Okay, the methods. As secondary data is hardly available, you need to do this job by yourself. You have to get the data, right? Either doing, let's say, surveys, business surveys with actors, with key actors, and this is, as I will talk about, mostly about tourism today. This was the time Linus spent in the field, totaling 9 months in 2018 and 19. He did a business survey. There are not that many businesses. He was able to mostly talk to every business there, around 40 in that sense. In that time, then he was doing qualitative interviews in Zambezi, in Windhoek, the capital, but also in Germany. Yeah, so these fairs are very important places to sell hunting, trophy hunting packages or safaris, right? So he went there as his kind of closed shop. And then he did also archival research. He was in the National Archive of Windhoek and also in Oxford. And then he was, of course, exploring existing data sets from the Namibian Association of Community-Based Natural Resource Management. He got the financial reports of the conservancies. I will introduce you this concept in a minute. Then we also run a household survey in different countries in Southern Africa. So he was also using the data for his analysis. And then Mfundo, he is now working on continuing the work on the tourism sector. He just finished a 3-month stay in the last quarter of 22, and he's now preparing for another trip to Namibia and Botswana. All right, so you see, this is a mix which is kind of, I think, necessary because, as I said, secondary data is not available. Yeah, we are talking about a country, yes, which is, let's say, Namibia, middle-income country, but has the highest Gini coefficient of the world, and especially in the area I'm focusing on. This is the poorest region of the country, right? So this and statistics and so on is not elaborated, right? So if you really want to know what is happening, you have no other choice to gather the data yourself. All right, now let me turn to the corridor. As I said, Walvis Bay takes a very important position here in Southern Africa and also for Namibia. And the idea, and that was very, very fascinating. When I visited the Walvis Bay Corridor Group for the very first time, the organization who is running these corridors, the 5 corridors they have in Namibia, they had a picture of Singapore. And I was asking them, hey, why are you having this picture of Singapore here? Oh, we would like to be like Singapore. The entry, the gate into Southern Africa, right? And yes, logistically, why not? Yeah, so you might have this kind of dream. You see this nice map, also another imaginary, right? So that the trade flows will get through Walvis Bay into Southern Africa. What about South Africa itself? Nothing. But yeah, so this is the vision, the imaginary they are focusing on. And the idea is, let's say, to initially was to somehow increase the throughput at Walvis Bay Port. And for this, they created 5, so to speak, growth corridors. Yeah, so to the north, this is the one I would like to focus on. Then through the Kalahari to the south. So they have in total 5. And this Australian consultancy firm was drafting the development plan. And you see that they were very clear about, okay, where the potentials are, which sectors might be influential in the future, which can be develop in the future. And you see here in this area, this is the Caprivi Strip, or the area which in the northeast of Namibia I'm focusing on. You see 3 bullets or 4 bullets, 2 bullets which are representing tourism, 1 bullet manufacturing, and the other one is agriculture, 2 bullets as well, hardly to see. So from the development plan and their perspective, and from this consultancy firm, this area has the potential to become a tourism destination, right? And they are right? Because Patima Mulilo is in the heart of this national park here. And we're talking about this Casa, or this, it also has a long name, Kavango Zambezi Transfrontier Conservation Area, which is covering 5 countries: Angola, Namibia, Zambia here, then Botswana, and Zimbabwe as well, right? So 5 countries. And the idea of the WWF, who was behind this, was in respect to nature conservation, because the wildlife population was really going down. But what you can see, since this Casa was introduced, and especially Botswana was very proactive in banning hunting, right? The population figures for example, for elephants, they grew up tremendously. So in that respect, conservation works, right? Conservation works. And the idea of Casa is a part also to generate income, livelihoods for the people who are living here. This is really a very large national park. The size is similar as France, right? So it's really, it's huge, right? And of course, people are living there. So 2 to 3 million people, nobody knows exactly, but this is the estimation, right? Around 3 million people, right? National parks are sometimes different from the parks we know, where sometimes, or in Germany, we have national parks where people are not allowed to enter, right? They are just reserved for animals and wildlife. Okay, so this is the situation. So in theory, a rich wildlife, a fascinating ecosystem, and probably you know Victoria Falls and the Zambezi from documentaries. Very, very, very impressive. Yes, indeed, there is the potential for tourism here, right? Okay, now let me focus on the Namibian case, on the Zambezi region, right? And you probably hear Patima Mulilo, as we have seen, in the middle of the Casa region. And they were using basically 3 mechanisms to mobilize, let's say, natural value. First of all, they were introducing community-based natural resource management. We are talking about an area which was organized in communal land, right? So this is not private land, it's communal land. And in this area, through this community-based natural resource management, communities were allowed to make use of the land, right? So they have to apply for conservancy. In this conservancy plan, they were also obliged to protect the nature. So they were also then obliged to define boundaries of let's say areas where nothing is happening, just wildlife and how they, so they have a kind of zoning system. So there was an inner area which is really 100% protected, right? And then, but a part of this, they were allowed to also make use of the nature. So they were allowed also to make use of the wildlife, for example, for hunting. And this natural resource management really was kind of institution building, because the communities, they were then organizing themselves like a community, right? So they have elected, you have to be a member, so people have to apply for membership. And this was really easy. Most of the people living in this area are the members. The members are electing then the managing board and so on. So this is a kind of institution building, so to speak. and trying to also empower the people in these local, in these rural areas, right? Okay, so this was number one. So the fact that they were introducing community-based natural resource management, allowing the people really to take advantage of the wildlife, but at the same time also protecting the nature. Then they were introducing a quota making process, right? So in order, especially to make profit from the wildlife, it's really very important how many animals you allow for hunting, right? And they were doing let's say surveys. They were doing estimations about the different wildlife population and how the different animals were developing. And the ministry in Windhoek is then deciding for different animals which quota is allowed to be hunted, right? And after this quota was fixed, then the professional hunters were bidding for this, right? And then the professional hunters got then the licenses, and then they were selling these licenses to the hunters, right? For example. Okay, and then what is also important that basically the revenues from hunting, for paying the license for killing an animal, was exclusively devoted for the conservancy. So they really make something with this kind of business. And if you're interested in figures, before COVID, for example, in this whole area, 60 elephants were allowed to be shot, right? So so we're not talking about mass, but of course it's ethically, ethically very, very disputed, right? And yes, if you see this, it has a history, a long history. Yeah, so Namibia was 30 years under German rule, and German rule was as bad as any colonial power, right? So this was really very harsh. There was an absence of regulation, and in that time already you saw this emerging trophy hunts. So, and also South African apartheid regime, which was in place until 1990, was also using wildlife as a quite exclusive thing. Yeah, what happened was really unregulated harvesting of ivory. Poaching was really a big issue, and the numbers of wildlife really were very low. Okay, now this is how it looks like, right? If you are interested to shoot an elephant, 14 days trophy hunting trip costs you around $45,000 US. Okay, but that's something, right? 45,000, including the fee for killing the animal. And if you don't have that much money, at least a buffalo, you get a buffalo for 16,500. Yeah, so these are the prices. So this is very exclusive, really very, very, very expensive. And I don't tell, now being Spaniards as well, I don't tell the story with our former king, being the vice president of the WWF, posing next to an elephant, killed elephant, right? So this is also a little bit strange. Okay, so but you see how big the business is, right? So it's really it's very expensive to do this. Okay, so how much now remains in the region, right? So, and Linus was trying to really get hold of these figures. It's more estimation, yeah, but I think it's close to reality, right? And you see in the Zambezi region, the turnover generated with hunting tourism is 4.8 million US dollars. And the safari tourism brings in 5.3 million US dollars. If you look how much really then remains at the local level, you see that the conservancies, and we're talking now about the management level of the conservancies, 1.4 million of this hunting tourism turnover remains in the region. Yeah, and these are hunting fees, right? So the hunting fees, they were allowed to be caught by the local conservancies. The tourism income for the conservancy was not that, or for the conservancies, it's not that much, right? 0.2. In total, the conservancies were generating an income of 1.7 million US dollars. And then if you then ask yourself, okay, what is really reaching the conservancy members as a whole group? We are talking about 2.4 million US dollar. If you look at the turnover in general, this is quite substantial. So 20% of the turnover remains somehow in the region among the conservancy members, right? All right. So this is just demonstrating you how important, let's say, this is as an income. But everything is relative in life, right? So these are the figures of the tourism, right? You might think, if you have heard now these figures, oh, this is a big influential sector, but it's not yet there, right? It's not yet there. So if you look at the numbers of tourists getting there, in 2005 to 2018, you have an increase, but we're talking in total about 60,000 tourists coming to the Zambezi region. Yes, it's doubling, and I think CASA and the establishment of the national park really made an impact here. The number of lodges, hotels and lodges, you see also is growing, yeah, from 24, 47, now 61. Even after COVID, now the numbers of lodges are increasing. But the employment effect is quite little. 4% of the workforce in the Zambezi is somehow working in the tourism sector. And if you look a little bit more closely what these people are doing, then you see these are more the low-paid jobs, right? And cleaning, security, in the kitchen, whatsoever, right? So this is already a step, right? But if you look at what they really earn, it's not that much, and you hardly see anyone in management position. And also then, based on and these are the figures based on our household survey, it's also contributing only little to the household income, right? 5%, 5.5%. So we can't say that the tourism sector is already booming, like we know from other touristic regions in Europe, like Mallorca or other places, right? So this is still, so to speak, in its infancy. And what is also important, and this is somehow demonstrating this map. Yes, 20%, around 20% of the turnover is somehow remains in the region. 80% is leaking out, right? And this is something where you see, for example, Windhoek being very, very important as a place where a lot of the, let's say, of the money generated in the Caprivi is then caught, right? This is the distribution of the professional hunters. Yeah, the ones who are offering these packages, 18,500 for the buffalo, 45,000 for the elephant, right? These professional hunters are sitting all in Windhoek or in the vicinity of Windhoek, right? And often they have accounts in bank accounts in Germany, in Switzerland, whatsoever. So if you book a trip, yeah, so you have to transfer the money to a Swiss bank, to a German bank. So I don't want to know really how much really remains in Namibia, but this is another question. But you see, and if you look, now we're talking about the professional hunters. If you look at the car rentals, the tour operators, and so on, they are all based in Windhoek. You hardly see anyone operating in the Zambezi region. So it's. If you look at the corridor, yes, this area around Windhoek is profiting very much from the tourism development as well in the northeast. Right, COVID. How did COVID impacted the situation? And here, just a selection of conservancies which we had, let's say, analyzed in more detail in the Zambezi region, and you see that the income really was heavily dependent on tourism income. You see the booking rates in 2020 were only 2.5 to 5% compared to the pre-COVID-19 period. This is really massive, really a massive drop in in tourism, and you see the income, how it changed, from 800,000 US Namibian dollar, to zero, in this conservancy. So it really hit these conservancies very, very harsh, and this is a problem with tourism in general, that tourism really responds very, very directly when let's say external shocks are happening, right? Okay, now let me switch now to the future prospects of this tourism business in the Zambezi region. Village in South Alta, I really like their concept, and of course, probably the fathers of the thinking are also sitting here around. This trinity of change agency concepts ask what is needed for the evolution of a new industrial path, right? So, or translated into our question here, how is it possible to really create business in tourism, businesses in tourism? And they say, in principle, to really establish a new path, you need three ingredients. You need the entrepreneurs, because they are the engines and drivers of change, but you also need some people or some changes in the institutional arrangements, right? So this is also important. So you need, let's say, enabling and facilitating conducive business environment. And especially in this region, the question of access to land, access to capital is really very crucial, or to education, for example, right? You need institutional changes and somebody who is really lobbying for it and trying to convince also the political system to introduce some reforms. And not only the authorities, let's say the administration, you also have to convince the traditional authorities, because this is something which is really also very different from my Asian experience. Yeah, you have, and normally in Asia, you have the Communist Party in Vietnam and the central administration, everything is clear, right? They have the power. Yeah, you have to talk to those guys and the Communist Party, right? So this is very clear and straightforward. But apart from, let's say, the formal governance system, you have these traditional authorities as well. Yeah. So, and the chiefs and so on in these places, and they are also very, very important. And they are also very influencing, and they were also quite influential, saying, okay, yes, this business is good. Or you as a woman, oh no, this is not a good idea that you start a business, right? These are things which we heard when we did our interviews, right? So the challenge is really very, very big in respect to institutional changes. And then you see the third element is also place-based leadership. So you need also, let's say, actions to pool resources, to convince, let's say, at upper levels, ministries, politicians, to foster, right, the development in these places, right? So I like very much this kind of concept, because it's now normally probably we are focusing just on one of these, or also on institutions, but also this place-based leadership, I think, is really very, very, very important. And Mfundo, who was spending already 3 months in the field, his idea is to compare 3 cases, and he tries to understand how these 3 places differ in respect to this trinity of change agency. And he is comparing Katima and the Zambezi region, right, which I introduced you before. Then he is analyzing Vic Falls with the Victoria Falls, which is really a very driving tourism destination. Of course, the Victoria Falls, they are iconic, right? So this is something very attractive location. And also then Kazana in Botswana. So he tries to understand why these 3 places are very differently or in respect to tourism development. And here, I know there are a lot of things now here on this slide. Just the first, I ask him, please nail down your first impressions about innovative entrepreneurs, institutional actors, and place-based leaders in Katima. And you see, this is very interesting. Yeah. For example, if you look at the businesses, at the entrepreneurs, we can say, oh, these businesses are different from you might think. Yeah, we have a lot of people who are already in their 50s when they start a business. And it's more kind of lifestyle-based business, right? They were a successful businessman or businesswoman, yeah, and mostly from South Africa, who want to stay or finish their life cycle there, right? So, and running a nice lodge with 4 or 5 small chalets is something which they can do, right? And it's not about, let's say, making, let's say, big money. It's just getting along, right? So this is, and this is something which is really totally different from the Zimbabwean case with the Victoria Falls, right? So there's limited product diversity. There are really also no experts in the business. They're just trying, right? So if we start a business from scratch, right? And yeah, it's complicated, I think. Then institutional actors, this is also very interesting. There's a disconnection between local and regional and also national actors, right? In terms of governance. Somehow this region seems to be left alone by the national government, right? And also there is not this collaboration, this attitude really also from these entrepreneurs to combine or to join forces and to really drive institutional change, right? So there are some legacies of the past, of the colonial time. Namibia is a very young country, established in 1990. It was South African before, right? In the apartheid times. And what, especially shortly before independence, right? Before 1990, this area was really, let's say, a very contested area, yeah, because the apartheid and the anti-apartheid fight was very conflictive. There was kind of war, civil wars. Many of the rebels were based in Angola, which is very close to the Zambezi region, right? And they were using, or let's say this Caprivi strip was really the combat zone, right? And a lot of South African soldiers from that time were thinking, oh, this is really nice. And they were already knowing, oh, especially at the river banks, these are nice plots. And shortly before independence, they bought them, right? So most of the land is already taken. So this is, of course, a problem for the ones who are trying to enter the business, because the nicest places are already taken, right? And the Namibian government, when they were declared independent, or the independence, they were saying, okay, we don't want kind of massive problems within the country. We accept what was arranged before, right, in terms of land holdings and so on, right? Okay, so this is something which also is impeding the tourism development, right? Okay, then let's say the place-based leaders. There are no one really who's popping up and saying, okay, now let us combine forces and so on. Let us struggle at Windhoek or internationally for fostering our business here, right? So this is also very, very limited. And also Black entrepreneurs are really in a minority. Okay, so this is what the situation is in Katima. And I know I'm running out of time. It's not the situation in Victoria Falls. It's totally different. And as I said, Mfundo is trying to understand why this is so different between the regions, which are very close to each other. It's easy to drive to Kazane within an hour from Katima, and then crossing to Vic Falls is also just a couple of hours, right? So this is really in close vicinity, but the levels, development levels in tourism are really very, very different. Okay, yes. Now let me shortly say something about agriculture, right? Because this corridor also has the idea to foster modern agriculture. And they were establishing big farms here and there. And it's a shame. You see the buildings, you see the machinery, you see the tractors, but they are just there. Nobody is using them. So they were trying to convince the farmers, the subsistence farmers, to become commercial farmers. Yeah, so they participate in these outgrower schemes, but they're not. But this is interesting. Apart on parallel and local indigenous initiative was evolving, right? These non-participants. So they were forming a horticulture value chain, right? So, and they were trying to join forces. They had this kind of institutional leader. And what is happening is that now this horticulture value chain is evolving and is now able to also sell their products to the local markets, to the lodges, and so on, right? This is very, very interesting. So this big plan with the green scheme did not turn out in the Zambezi region, but interestingly, something bottom-up evolved, right? So this is something which is also a nice feature, yeah, of this corridor plannings, because it's totally unintended in that sense. Okay, and then the last slide here is about what is happening at the nodes, at the cities. And this is also another issue we would like to understand in more detail. You see the urban expansion of Katima Mulilo, 95 and 2018. And this is massive, right? So this dark color is now the urban area. Yeah, so it tripled, it quadrupled in this time period, right? So the urbanization is taking momentum, but not really driven by the sectors I was mentioning before, not by tourism, not by manufacturing, and not by, let's say, agricultural development and processing of food, right? So this is also another issue we would like to understand. What is really driving this? Okay, now the conclusion. You know, at the beginning, I was posing these three questions. So what are the territorial outcomes caused by the growth corridors? Who benefits? So yes, what we can see, even in tourism, positive corridor effects largely unfold in central nodes along the corridor. I explained you a little bit about the situation of the position of Windhoek, while the hinterland serves as either a resource region or target market. To understand corridor effects, we need to examine who is able to make use of the opportunity space, right? This is also important. Yes, it creates an opportunity. This corridor is doing something. Yeah, this corridor is doing, the infrastructure, the soil infrastructure is doing something, right? But who is really able to make use of it? Then, which places and people do they neglect? So I told you about, or explained to you a little bit about the situation with Black entrepreneurship. Yeah, very difficult to get into the business. If you don't have land, you can't get the credit, right? It's quite simple. Then what you also have, what I try to show you, that also there is something which is not happening according to the plan. So unintendedly, this emergence of this horticulture value chain as an alternative livelihood strategy. And what is also important to really focus on these unintended side effects. And who is involved in the corridor making? Who do these spatial imaginary shape the development pathway of region value chains? I think this is also very important. When we think about CASA, the WWF was behind the plans. And of course, their intention is conservation, nature conservation. They are ecologists, and this is fine. But what we have heard and learned from also a talk from a lady, one of the vice director of this National Namibian Organization of Conservancies, is, yes, we did fine with nature conservation. Wildlife population is going up, this is fine. but we totally missed the improvement of the living conditions for the people, right? So we missed this out, right? We were successful on the one thing, but we did not have an impact on the livelihoods as we have imagined, right? So this is something which is really very important. So the suggestion here is really to look who is really behind these plans and trying to understand their logics. The logic was nature conservation, not, let's say, introducing and enforcing capabilities of the local people, right? All right, that's it. Thank you very much for your attention.
Very much, Javier, for a very, very interesting and challenging, and you're raising quite a lot of issues about development in Africa. And I have quite a lot of questions, but I don't want to capitalize on this. There are quite a few of you here. So, and I know that someone is already itching to ask questions. So, Simona, will you please do the honors and ask the first question?
Yeah, actually, I have so many that I don't know how we are going to compact that, but let me try because it was really fascinating. Moreover, it's just by chance that we are working on Namibia as well, totally different perspective. However, I mean, I'm a bit confused on a few points, and particularly, I mean, how could natural management resource and the WWF expected to pursue human development and economic development targets? I mean, conservation is conservation and is something totally different. And also, I found difficult to understand how hunting is, I mean, the problem, I mean, in places like Namibia, tourism is precisely because I'm going as a tourist and I explored very well that it's one of the most expensive places of the planet. Tourism doesn't come from around the area. Tourism comes from Europe and possibly some Singapore or alike or, you know, Chinese, I mean, but not from the area. So tourism, I agree that is possibly a vital resource, okay, for a selected type of tourism, possibly not hunting, because nowadays thinking about hunting for the planet is something that is simply horrendous. So, I mean, corridors, local corridors are something that connects localities there across 5 countries, but do not connect the place with the rest of the world. And we know also from tourism, there is quite a lot of work on, for example, Italian tourism, right? We have a very strong literature and you see that connection with the rest of the world in what matters for quality tourism. Okay, so this is something that I wanted to know if you have considered. The other major point that I want to raise is I haven't read this Grillitz Sodorada, but Trinity of Change Agents in 2020. I mean, you know, institutions and development have been in the research for 30 years. He was one of the fathers, right? We are always reinventing the wheel here. I mean, systems, why you don't find entrepreneurs? Because there is no education system that function. So, you know, it's also all these actors missing. Where are the industry association? Or, you know, I mean, you cannot have entrepreneurs if you don't have. So, I mean, actors, linkages, different parts of society. And obviously you don't find innovative entrepreneurs, particularly from the local population. In fact, you said South African are coming in their 60s and putting up, and this is what I dealt with. Booking a tour of Namibia, not for hunting, obviously, right? It was a South African retired, very well, you know, connected guy. So local population, zero, totally. So I really, you know, you know so much about this, but is it possible to have, you know, from you, the reply to what is really comprehensive strategy, place-based. This is not place-based. It's across 5 countries that have completely different histories. So, I mean, how you respond to this?
Okay,
I mean,
yeah, all right.
It's a simple question.
It's
Tough question.
it's provocative,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I mean, you know, we have been
Question,
colleagues and
Yeah,
friends
yeah, yeah.
for 30
That's fine.
years,
That's
so-
fine, Samyona.
All right, let me start with the first. Yes, it was really the intention to combine natural conservation with let's say livelihood improvements. This is stated, and yes, but I think the focus and the policy was really very much on this nature conservation. And you know, this area, you were talking about an area which is basically where you have a lot of herds, cattle, and so they are and basically there is no policy how to deal with cattle and herds, which is really probably originally and culturally the most important agricultural activity there, right, for many people. Yeah, so this was faded out somehow, or not seen whatsoever, not tackled. Agriculture as well as, let's say, subsistence agriculture, also something which was not seen. You know, as I said, when they were applying for this conservancy status, they have to come up with zoning. So what areas are the most attractive ones? Along the rivers, right? Because you have the crocodiles, the hippos, and whatsoever, animals going there to drink. But there's a massive conflict in use with humans, because these were also the areas where the rice fields were, and where you got water for agriculture, right? So and through the zoning, people were pushed out from these areas, and they have difficulties with their agricultural production. We had some years of drought in this area, so they were seeing the water, but they are not reaching the water, right? So, and this is massive then, right? Because you have really people dying and starving and so on because of that. Yeah. So this is how the planning was done, but it was written down. Yes, it should also improve the livelihoods of the people. Yeah. So this is complicated. Yeah. Yes, NAM water was introducing a pipe system, but it's expensive to get the water through these through NAM water. So hardly anyone is then connected to the pipe system, right? So because they can't afford it. Right? These are then the realities, and this is just to demonstrate, okay, how the vision of these growth corridors. And as I said, we have good examples in many places of the world where these corridors were somehow working, right? And they were, let's say, having these positive impacts, which a theory, agglomeration economies and so on, probably is suggesting, right? But this is totally different, a different story in the areas I'm dealing with, right? And this is just because there's still the belief, with it, just we build a street, this corridor, and things will happen. And these policies are introduced by the nations themselves, right? So especially in Namibia, yeah. And another case, Sakot, I didn't came across Sakot today in Tanzania. Yara was at the front wheel, at the front seat, and steering the development plan for that. And of course, having Yara, one of the biggest, largest manufacturers of seeds and pesticides and whatsoever.
Of course.
They created a market for themselves through the corridors, right? So it's so important, and to understand who is really drafting these things, right? And to understand their logics. And this is what we are intending to do. And in now the comparison now, I think what as I said, Infundo's PhD is on, to trying to understand why is Botswana and Kazanel and the Vic Falls doing better than Katima? What did they differently, right? And for example, the Zimbabwean government only allows joint ventures with the majority in the hands of the Zimbabwean, for example, right? So they were quite strict in saying, okay, the market access.
Vietnam taught us a lot about
Yeah,
that, right?
yeah. So this is very
Exactly.
important. Yeah. So and in Namibia, it's more kind of laissez-faire in that sense, right? So and this is so now he's digging into the other cases really to understand why they are at a different level, right? So this is this, yes. And yeah, the question on the concept, right? What I like is the idea to look at places which don't have a history in that sense in industry whatsoever. Yeah, so in evolutionary economic geography, often the focus is on regions which already have a history. There's a kind of related variety, the branching effect, and so on. Yeah, but this is something which is starting from more or less scratch, right? And that's why I found it. I know, yeah, that's why I was saying that the founding fathers are sitting here.
The entrepreneurship has been one of the main concepts with neoliberalism. Everybody entrepreneurs. And so I don't think it's fit exactly. This is what I'm saying.
Yeah, it's not enough.
This is what I'm saying.
Yeah, it's not enough. And also displaced leadership, of course. Okay.
Let's see, we have other questions from the audience. Anyone else? Yes, go ahead, Adam.
I think this is probably more of a comment than a question.
Please.
But we've seen the application of this growth corridor vision actually as a material way of extraction. Meaning there's a literature that has emerged talking about using these growth corridors as a way of securing European supply of critical minerals, for instance, and facilitating that kind of easy supply that otherwise is kind of at risk.
Right.
And obviously there's a long literature as well that talks about kind of, this isn't about local development. This is actually about securing Western futures, but what are the spillovers? What are the local effects? I think it's a valid question.
Yeah, of course. But you have seen the map I showed you, the plan, the development plan from Oregon, which was done for the Namibian government.
Yeah.
Right. So there is also the hope that through the corridor you have this regional positive regional impacts as well. But if you look at the corridor and which trucks are driving on this corridor, you see the copper, trucks after trucks with copper from the Congo. So this is what is happening. No manufacturing whatsoever along the corridor so far. No processing of food or whatsoever, right? So this is what you see along the corridor are trucks really going up and down from Congo. This is really what you see. And it's also sad. It's not that much happening on this corridor.
We got the next question. So
thank you very much. I'm a student of local economic development, and actually this topic is my center of interest. So I'm very happy to be able to join this seminar. So I have 3 questions. The first is my understanding is in Africa, still they have an issue in terms of economic transformation. So how to industrialize the economy. And my understanding is corridor development is one of the pathway, possibly. But I also have a complex feeling, although I believe the impact. So generally speaking, do you still have a belief to the corridor development will act significantly to make a significant impact in terms of economic transformation? Second point is, since I learned critical thinking in LED, so I just want to ask, in terms of the relation tourism and corridor development, actually the tourism and agriculture is quite significant economics activity in Africa. But from my experience, to go to like a conservancy, I don't use corridor. I use a Cessna or a plane to visit especially in that place. So I was wondering how much the tourism industry and the corridor developments is related to. So the third question is maybe agriculture activities quite related to the logistics. So maybe my discussion topic would be the Northern Corridor development, how much the Northern Corridor development would be related to foster economic activity, agricultural economic activity along the corridor. So do you have some advice to me?
Also very tough questions, very good questions. Yes, I think the corridor alone is not enough, right? So, and the states really have also to come up with an industrial policy. It starts with education, vocational training, and so on and so on. And the belief just that this corridor, the infrastructure will lead to development, I think this is too naive, right? So this is not enough. And the question is whether countries and the governments are willing to invest in these very important additional spheres or areas, right? So, and what I've learned in Southeast Asia, in some countries, is that the status is different. Yeah, that they are really investing in health and education and so on. So this is different from my experience so far in Southern Africa, right? So I think it can work. I don't know whether this global, let's say, the global value chain integration is the first right step, right? Because you really need to somehow be competitive, with the outside world. And as I said, this is one of the poorest areas in the world, or in Namibia at least, right? So and literacy rates are high. So I think if you think of industrial development, you really have to invest in the capacities of the people first, right? So this is so I think it could be a vehicle, but it's really the countries have to put a lot of effort in these other activities. And agriculture, right? It's a question. It's very logical that people in that area, under the circumstances they live, are subsistence farmers. It's very logical. I probably we would do the same if we in their situation, yeah. And to convince them to give up this diversity in that sense, that make their living somehow, right, is really very tricky. And the state farms, they are basically state farms, and these green scheme projects are not working at all, right? So they have bad management. They introduce things. Of course, there's a modern agriculture, not taking into consideration, let's say, what traditionally the knowledge is in the area. So they're not taking advantage of what people know, right? So, and they want to impose a totally different agricultural system there, and people deny, right? And this is something which is really problematic. Of course, Namibia and agriculture is a difficult issue because it's a desert country, right? Basically, and just in that area, in the northeast, where you have the 4 rivers, or at the south, close to South Africa, the Orange River. These are the places where you could make use of water and irrigate your production, right? But the rest is really desert. Yeah, it's really difficult then to develop agriculture.
And also the correlation between the tourism and the corridor development.
Sorry,
The relation between tourism activity and corridor
The
development.
trade activities? Or
Yeah,
what do you mean?
Because how much I doubt the correlation between the tourism industry and corridor development, because very rich people use Cessna or plane to.
Of course, if you can afford to do a hunting safari, 45,000, 60,000, whatsoever, you fly in and fly out.
Exactly.
Yeah, so this is something. This is also a kind of tourism, right? And of course, it's it's long distance, right? So it's from Windhoek. This is the one of the main entry points into Namibia, the capital, the international airport there. It's more than 1,000 kilometers to Katima. But at the moment, there are negotiations whether, for example, Eurowings is expanding their service to Katima Molilo, right? So they are already flying to Vic Falls, right? And of course, if the local businesses, and they are now starting to lobby for it, right? To really get connected to international flights, right? This could be then a change, right? And bring other kind of investors and so on board, but it's not yet decided, right?
Yes, go ahead, please.
My name is Bakhtiar. I'm also an LET student. So bringing together everything that's been said, I can't help but draw parallels to the China-Pakistan economic corridor that's been constructed in my own country. So what we've seen is that even though billions are invested in the highway system, in creating nodes along those trade routes, regionally, around those areas, these areas are about as underdeveloped as they go. 0% literacy, 100% poverty, no regional transport infrastructure, barely any roads, no bridges. Namibia is a desert, to the north of Pakistan is all just mountains. That's where the Karakoram and the Himalayas are. So, and there's no indigenous capital to invest in those areas because they're surviving on subsistence farming. And there's no provincial or national government interest to invest in those areas. So, because to even gauge the economic potential, you have to put billions in. So from a regional policy perspective, how do you bridge this gap? Like how do you convince provincial or national governments or donors that this capacity needs to be built up when it's difficult to even see where those returns could come from? Because last year, at the beginning of last year, I was working at a provincial planning agency. We were working on land use plans in the northwest of Pakistan, and everything you said, everything that's been highlighted, these were points that came up again and again and again. We have no money, we have no education, where's the entrepreneurship going to come from? And the national and provincial governments have no interest either. So how do you create that space where you convince the governments this should happen? Not purely because these are people and they deserve development the same as everyone else, but like, how do you convince them that this is economically feasible, viable, and in your interest?
Good question. Good question. If we would have answers to this, yeah.
You have to follow my course. You'll get the answers at the end. So go ahead.
Okay, yeah, but what I also have told you a positive story with this horticulture value chain. Bottom-up initiative, you have persons, you have a pioneer trying to convince other farmers to get into tomatoes and cucumber and whatsoever. And they were having success, right? And I think what is really important is to motivate, to find out these potentials and to foster those potentials. It doesn't have to do anything with this green scheme plan, the vision of the government, right? These large farms and so on, yeah. But this example, even there, you see this evolving horticulture value chain, a regional, local value chain, where more and more farmers are seeing the profits. I think this is what needs to be fostered. Yeah, I don't have high expectation about the central government. Yeah, in many countries, right? I leave it like that. But Andres, probably you. Yeah.
I've been to Namibia advising the government through the German Development Agency.
Mm.
And I'll reserve my judgment. It was a long time ago, I must say. But,
yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Any other questions? If not, I'll ask, I think, the last question, which is something that has been bothering me. For all the talk, when you talk about a corridor, a development corridor, and you talk about an international development corridor, the impression is that you're going to have seamless movement through the corridor. And for all the talk in Africa of regional integration, national borders in Africa remain massive barriers to trade.
Mhm.
And they actually deter trade more than integrate areas surrounding one another. And you have the area Katima here, which is really isolated from the rest of Namibia, which, by the way, is the smallest country in population in the region, surrounded by 4 other countries: Angola, Botswana, Zambia, and Zimbabwe, and probably with very little capacity to actually integrate itself with the others, because it's completely surrounded by borders, with exception of the part of the Caprivi Strip, which actually isolates it from the rest of Namibia. What is the role of borders there? How does it, this is a hypothesis for Mfundo, is it that it's more isolated, that why Katima is less dynamic than Kazane or, for example, or Victoria Falls? And how do you think that if there would be a much greater integration in the region, not just in terms of parks, but in terms of trade, in terms of flows of people, in terms of flows of capital, that would lead to a flourishing of the area?
Right. This is exactly the idea of our second phase in this long-term project. I didn't explain this at the very beginning. So you have seen this is funded by the German Research Foundation. And so it's a project which can last for 12 years. So, and every 4 years we have to apply for the next phase. And in the first phase, we were very much focusing on what's happening in Zambezi region itself. Now we would like to especially look at the potential of this cross-border situation, right, and the linkages. So far, I only have some anecdotal evidence, but this horticulture value chain is suffering a lot from the illegal trade coming from Zambia. So this is something, so you see, on the one hand, yes, this horticulture value chain is really very locally organized, right? And the market's also very locally only so far, yeah, because they need to grow, they need to learn, they need to learn the techniques, how to market, how to sell with price and so on. And Zambia is apparently more competitive, and the border is still a border, right? And however, you have informal flows of trade, you have informal flow of people, even workers are cheaper in Zambia. So farmers in the Zambezi region hire them. So they get with the truck to the river, and then they get them on the truck. So I can't give you an answer here, but it's difficult. Yeah, it's not that easy. In principle, you are right? So, and I'm also in favor of this regional trade and so on, but seeing how this emerging horticulture is now fighting with this illegal inflow of the products, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I hardly can't give you an answer here.
Mm-hmm. And sorry, just I didn't want to just extend, but for a horticulture, you don't need Walvis Bay.
No.
You don't need a ship. You need a plane. And Katima is far closer to Harare or to Lusaka than it is to Windhoek, which is the main international airport there.
Yeah.
So how can you combine that if probably the border still, although there's this African continental free trade union area that has been created, which is still not really working. How can you actually thrive if you are next to, let's say, a bigger market, and that bigger market is preventing you from getting it?
You're right, but it would be a little bit too early now for the horticulture farmers in the Zambezi, right? Okay. Yeah, so I think it is the potential in the future, right? But they need to get there. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, Javier, for a wonderful talk. I think we should thank you. See you at the Cañada Center and to talk about issues of development that cover many parts of the world. And thanks to all of you for coming here, to all of you listening in the YouTube channel for doing it. You know that at the Cañada Center, events come thick and fast. This is the second event we've had this week. In 3 weeks' time, we're going to have 2 other events. So we're going to have first Louis Dijkstra from the European Commission talking about the development trap and the rise of discontent in Europe. And then on the Thursday, that's on the 7th of February. And then on the Thursday, the 9th of February, we have the governor of the Bank of Spain coming to talk about globalization. In that respect, I would encourage all of you to come here to the LSE, to join us at the Cañada Center, and also those of you watching to continue connecting yourself from wherever you are in Spain or elsewhere, in Britain or elsewhere in the world, because there will be quite a lot of new events coming in the future. So thank you very much, and see you all at the next meeting.